How's it going, Dan? It's great to finally have you on the podcast. I think that we've rescheduled this thing a couple times now, but I'm really excited for our conversation. I'm glad that we could finally get together to do this thing.
Yeah, no, happy to be with you today, and happy to get this one under our belt here. So open it up for questions and let's get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dan, I start everyone off with telling how they got started in IT, right? Maybe what interested you in the IT world that you were like, oh, I want to go down, this path. And the reason why I start everyone off there is because I have a section of my audience that are in that situation, that are, trying to figure out if IT is for them. Maybe they can make a career change or something like that. And I feel hearing everyone's, background, everyone's unique story, just helps others to know that, hey, maybe I can do this thing too. I've done over 150 episodes at this point, and I haven't heard the same background twice. So
yeah, that seems to be the case with information security. I think for me, my journey was actually a state-funded program for low-income families where, we applied. I had a summer job at 16, and, I was a part of a place called Education Connection. It's been rebranded, but in Connecticut, it is a kind of regional educational system service center that provides, at the time, had provided educational technology services to school districts. And I had that program for the summer. I think we built a website. I'd be dating myself if I mentioned what we developed it in, but it was a fun exercise. And at the end, they asked if I could stay on for part-time hours. And I worked at that facility for 4 years. They were fantastic to me. And from there it was, all right, well, I seem to be good at this thing called computers. This goes back to the 90s, right? So I'm like, yeah, I'll stick with it, see what shakes out of this. And between that, kind of getting in focusing initially my studies in computer science, and kind of just, technology just became a part of the roles that I excelled in, and I kind of stuck to it from that point forward. So.
So back in the 90s, I was a little kid, right? So I don't remember much, but, back in the 90s in tech, what was the atmosphere like? Were people excited for the future of it? Was the sky's the limit? Was it potentially even limited, in your own vision? Like, okay, I'll do this thing, and it's kind of just, tech support. And that's what it is. That's where it'll be, forever. Because, I look at it now, and with the, AI evolving like it is, with the cloud being as predominant as it is, it's constantly evolving, right? But was that the same vision back then?
Back then, I remember vividly when we received our gateway boxes of PCs, right? I had the cow print, if you're not familiar with the Gateway brand. We also received what were the latest and greatest Macintosh, the iMac, that little monitor kind of multicolored thing. That was like all the rage. And when we talked about technology, you had big players. Novell, as an example, we had a Novell infrastructure. Cisco, household name back in the 90s. I think when you look at Microsoft, even the MCSE was the certification du jour. Like, that's what you needed to have a successful career in IT. And I think when you look at the technologies and really how businesses applied those, the scope or the vision was very much of like, oh, we have these tools and they're going to make us more productive. Now that net is just casted even wider with what is considered, a business enabling technology. So it was, I'd say, a very different world. I think back then, the focus was really on, especially on the engineering side, understanding when you're in university, you were going through understanding how microprocessors work. And, my program was very specific for that. But a lot of my coworkers at the time, they just knew through experience and education how the really almost like lower level operations happened, how to support hardware technology at a very low level. And I think that the main difference that we're seeing today is that's become very commoditized, very hidden below the scenes. There are certainly individuals that I work with at EDB that understand just out of necessity from a Postgres perspective, understand those internals. But, the economy that has built on top of that low level understanding has really grown. And I think, individuals have an opportunity to excel in the field, technology field in general, even without that knowledge. Now, having that knowledge only makes you that much more proficient in understanding why things work the way they work. But I think comparing the mid 90s and that ramp up to .com, there's a lot of web kind of growth there. But I think, techies were more techie back then, believe it or not. And I think while some folks would cling to the laurels on whether they're as hardcore as some of the old engineers, you're not going to find many mainframe folks. And if they do, they're making a pretty penny these days, because it's just the level of knowledge and just institutional knowledge, especially in organizations that have those technologies, just can't be replaced. We studied this at Mass Mutual with the aging out of specific talent that would run our mainframe systems. We built cognitive knowledge systems that were trying to solve how do we get an L1 to an L3 in terms of proficiency and being able to address really hard problems by cognitively modeling what a mainframe engineer kind of looks like and how they think through analysis. So this is kind of a large problem, but in general, when we look at opportunity, and I think you made mention your viewers often have, a question, is IT right for me? I think, is technology the right world for you? I don't think there's plenty of jobs that technology doesn't play a strong part, but I think we're going to start to see industries being changed that have been isolated from that. When we look at the 4 or 3 prior stages of industrial revolution, right? We're going into a 4th, and this is what AI is driving. And this industrial revolution is going to change the way we work in ways that we're not even aware of today, but also change areas that traditionally haven't been in focus. So, farming for a while has actually benefited from technology advancements, right? But where does AI take a farmer of the future? Do you have a love and passion, right, for agriculture, but also have a knack for technology, where that intersection is going to become more interesting for you, right? Or if you're, a post-grad and you have these skills and you're like, well, where do I want to work? Well, there's going to be these industries that are not really saturated. And when we think of reskilling ourselves, it's where do we want to work? Where do we want to apply ourselves? And ultimately, we want to be successful in our career, but there's just going to be opportunity for individuals to kind of prove themselves and to kind of live I would say successful career, but a fulfilling life. I think it's really exciting where we're at right now. And I don't know that is technology or IT the right thing for me. Is like, do I have a passion for this and a passion for some industry? Because those worlds are colliding right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, in the near future, or even right now, we're going to see IT be involved into fields and into ways that, we never really imagined before, right? Like you mentioned how AI and IT will meet for farming, right? And how it'll augment how farmers, plant crops and, maintain them and things like that. That could be a whole industry right there. That's a consulting firm of tech people that come in, deploy an AI, set it up with a drone, and the drone does, whatever.
And autonomous mapping of property. Some of these things likely exist today, but I think the catalyst for the more human aspects of how they engage, and when you take a look at various industries, and I'm not going to call it farming, but various industries, right? Like the service aspect naturally has this level of personal engagement with customers, patients. Take healthcare, and there are ambient technologies, to give a really pointed example for healthcare, where AI is able to, in the background, listen. So imagine walking in, you're having a conversation with the nurse prior to the doctor, you're having a conversation with the doctor, but in real time, that conversation is being turned into insights, and those insights are building a profile of what could be wrong. And as the doctor is asking more probing questions, really getting into a potential diagnosis for for the condition that you have, and being able to automatically type out and have those notes being put into the EMR, that's happening today. You think about how that experience can translate to other industries. It's going to enable productivity gains across population demographics, even skill levels, bringing up and allowing even entry level, analysts or whatever role it may be able to perform at much higher levels than they are today. And that's with the assistance of these technologies. So it's going to be wild. When you look at the prior stages or phases of these industrial revolutions, this one, is going to affect our families, our kids and generations for, much like, the industrial revolutions of the past. So it's very exciting for sure.
Yeah. I wonder, you bring up like the doctor's office, and I wonder how much of a doctor's, just a normal physician, how much of his work would be offset by AI potentially, right? Because even with like telehealth and telemedicine, right, they're not there touching you, obviously. They're listening to what you're telling them. They're putting your symptoms into a computer, checking the symptoms with a illness, and then prescribing you something, right? Like that's all things that an AI could probably do at some point.
Yeah, I mean, there are at least two camps. I'll put it that way. There is the camp that looks at this as there's no way a machine knows more than me. This technology, I've done this for years. I know when I see a condition, and this is. And then there's going to be another camp that's, wow, I have this assistive technology. I'm still in the driver's seat for making decisions, but it's providing me real-time telemetry, real-time information that makes my job easier. And when it comes to compliance, the documentation and the potential for misbilling and miscoding, that is also addressed with the ability to leverage these technologies. And I think practices that lean into this are going to see much more time with patients where they need to, less time, which a good portion of time and overhead is spent on the compliance and governance of ensuring that records are kept. When that starts to become just seamless and kind of to the way the technology is being framed, ambient, it's around you, your work and what you dislike about your job, it starts to be minimized in a way that you get back to treating patients and paying attention to the actual patient rather than worrying about, I got to get to the next thing and figure out this next set of tasks that I have ahead of us. So, I mean, I'm bullish with the way that this is going to change industries, but certainly in the more regulated industries where compliance and regulation exist for protecting patients and protecting organizations and entities, that overhead, I think, is where we're going to see a lot of initial gains, where we can get people back to being productive and compliant at the same time. So,
yeah, it'll be a really fascinating time and work effort there. It's almost like a compliance check right? While you're doing it, while the new information is being added in, that, I mean, that's even offsetting some tech careers there. Like, it's, it's interesting how everything will shake out.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, the replacement of roles will only go so far because there's going to be companies at different levels and how they want to operate their business. But even, in particular, look at like Chrome OS. When that came out, everyone's like, oh, you don't need a desktop anymore. And no, you still, there are plenty of use cases where that's valid. And even to your point, telehealth is going to benefit and is benefiting. There's a company called Nabla that has kind of this, they just received their Series B. So with a verified product, it's getting traction. But embedding this in the conversation, and you can imagine we're having this dialogue remotely today, but imagine kind of next to your profile, I'm seeing real-time updates to what the system thinks it might be and the areas to continue to probe into for questions. That augmented workflow, I think, is really the exciting part. And whether it's doctor, whether it's agriculture, even think of cooking chef. Maybe there's other applications that we can't even think about. It's happening now. That change is starting to happen now. And if an individual in your audience does have some technical abilities, but really has a passion for some industry that isn't technology focused, that intersection is going to be the magic mix, because being able to bring those together are going to make any business more efficient at the end of the day. And you're going to have laggards that are going to be left behind. And, sure, there's folks on the bleeding edge of things, but that wave is going to crest, and you better be on the front side of that if you're a business. Certainly the careers that you're looking for will be growing on that upswing. So there's plenty of opportunity for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about how, back in the 90s, IT professionals were a lot deeper in the space, right? You really had to know the underlying processes and systems that are running and whatnot, and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And even, when I started out after college, right, talking like 2010 period, it was still like that to a good extent. It wasn't as deep. I know what you're talking about. It wasn't as deep as reading the kernel,
CPU instruction sets and kind of understanding logic gates and things like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was not a part of it, very thankfully. If it was, I might not be in IT right now. But is that method still beneficial, where early on in your career, you get this deep dive experience into a platform, into a technology, and you're learning the ins and outs of it. And then as you progress throughout your career, you're kind of going, I guess, to higher tiers within the technology, right? You're not worried about the processes anymore. You're not worried about the app, and things like that. You think that there's still some benefit with that?
Yeah. So I'll make sure to clarify my position. That background, that knowledge, absolutely still extremely helpful, especially high tech. Understanding that depth is a skill set that is needed today. I think the thing that I'd probably call out is the breadth of roles doesn't necessarily require you to have that fundamental knowledge, because it's been abstracted. And you can, if you think of it as an inverted pyramid, you can start anywhere up above that. But for certain roles, you definitely need that foundational kind of pillar. To your question directly, I would agree, and I would say, if you're fortunate to have worked in an environment where you're getting that exposure, that you're understanding those internals, take the time and really, really absorb it. I think that will pay dividends through the rest of your career. It'll allow you not just to operate at the operational level, but if you're trying to solve a problem that's unique to you, if your knowledge starts at this and you need to kind of know about the internals enough to solve your problem, you're going to be shorthanded and you're going to need help. And it's not wrong to ask for help. It just means you're just less useful in your role and how you want to solve a particular challenge. So definitely that knowledge is super valuable. And if you have an opportunity, comparing different job roles, like money is valuable, the culture of a company is valuable. I would say also that the level of work that you're doing in complex systems, that will pay dividends throughout your career for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, looking back on my career a little bit, it's always interesting, the little nuggets of information that have stuck with me, that will randomly kind of pop up, like now, for instance, a couple of years ago, I was deploying a web proxy. It was the first time I ever did it. Never touched a proxy before, never really touched network security, anything before. And years prior to that, I had some experience with DNS registries and, how it's stored and when it's refreshed and things like that. And we ran into an issue with the proxy where basically no one around me knew what was going on. They couldn't really figure it out. I'm like, oh, we need to reboot, 3 times because it clears out this registry that it's pulling this information from. And once we do that, it'll pull the right information. It refreshes itself. And everyone thought that I was joking. And I was like, no, like that's literally what it is, And so we tried it on one device and it worked. And like even my boss was like, well, surely it's not going to work again. And it worked again. And he's like, okay, I guess we need to do that everywhere now.
When did that reboot? But yeah, I think 3 reboots is, an echelon above. Yeah. I think, when I worked at MassMutual, I saw a lot of problems in the kind of personal computing workplace technology area. And more often than not, you hear odd stories. And it's really when you get into the troubleshooting aspect that you realize it's almost a miracle that some of these things work at all.
Yeah.
But you start to appreciate, and now I'm an old timer, but the old timers that are there and they're like, I used to run token ring. And you're like, all right, yeah. And I removed plenty of that in my day, but I was removing it. I wasn't responsible for its operation. And I was surprised at how many times during my career that would surface when I was on the infrastructure operations side, where, it always comes back to some legacy implementation or technology implementation that was quirky. And if you knew the quirks, your life was much easier. And, supporting stuff without knowing some of those quirks and how we arrived to now, major role, definitely more hard. And you start to respect some of the folks that struggled through the pre-golden days, put it that way.
Yeah. Earlier on in my career, I did a little bit of work with some government agencies, and my company, they told me before I went on site, they're like, oh, this is a very custom deployment. You got to know the ins and outs of it and everything else like that. I get on site, I start looking at our product, and I'm like, how the hell does this thing even work? Like, literally, how is this thing running right now? And it was so bad that it got to the point where I just basically had to start over. I had to do a complete, clean install, but now they're actually on a supportable product because the company, everyone in the company knows how it's running. Everyone in the company knows what's the expected result and things like that. Because there was pointers in places that should not have existed. There was, custom directories with custom scripts in it running, and it was such a mess. The only option was to start over. But, if you don't have that kind of experience, it's difficult to move along in your career, because you're kind of building on all of these different experiences and skill sets and whatnot. Is that what you found as well, looking back now as a CISO?
Yeah. I think for me, it was always, a bit of, all right, how do I progress in my career? And I made it very much, while there's opportunity, it's up for me to seize it, but also me to be ready to kind of step into a role or an opportunity that would require. So I did a lot of self-study, right? First certification was Network Plus. I think, was fortunate enough after a little bouncing around between positions to get to a desktop position at a financial services company. And we had this thing at the time called Citrix, a presentation server that was just released, and we were moving to that and building on just self-study, moving on to more network access gateways that they had in their product line. I always seem to look for, all right, where next do I need to be ready to apply my skills? And while virtual desktops became a thing and a fad for quite a long time, that was displaced by this thing called mobile. And now we need some MDM. All right, well, now with MDM comes this challenge of identity, and traditional ways of managing identity were slow and cumbersome. And we have this thing called Okta and these identity platforms that make it really easy. And of course, there's new standards that help facilitate that, like with SAML and OpenID Connect, right? But I think the salient point here is technology is going to change. If you want to make this a career, you have to watch the trends. And I always was mindful of where the trends were. What could I bring value to my business and organization, and then continue driving it, and security being I wouldn't say the last stop because I'm still on that train, but I think it was an opportunity. I spent close to 10 years deploying technology that was used in an enterprise, Fortune 100, right? And now I had to secure it, but it gave me the advantage of knowing how an end user connects to a system. How are we doing remote access? How are we servicing remote employees? When they're in the office, what is the network layout, and how are we securing connections on the network? How are we detecting threats, and what's normal user behavior? Well, if you work for 10 years supporting an enterprise, there's a lot of abnormal and normal behavior that needs to be baseline. So you start to have a better appreciation of the challenge, but you're actually in a much stronger place than others because you understand how these pieces fit together and ultimately how you have to secure them. So I think, for anyone aspiring to kind of make progress in their career, you have to be motivated. You have to be a self-learner. And you have to kind of realize where the trends are going. I've seen a lot of fantastic technical talent get stuck up on philosophical preferences of how they think the world should be. And if we just use this flavor, I'm not going to pick on Linux folks, but this flavor of Linux, our users would be fantastic. No one in enterprise is going to use Linux as their primary device except for a handful of people, right? But there are situations where I think individuals are shorting themselves opportunity by clinging to a philosophical view of technology that they have no control over. And as much as you may love one technology coming in, if you're seeing its application struggle, well, it's probably losing its value at some point to the business that you're in, right? And at the end of the day, you're there to support a business. Even if you're on IT, you're there to generate revenue for an organization, right? And I think that gets lost sometimes with some really, really talented engineers that I've seen over the years.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. It's very easy as I guess techies, right, to get attached to a technology because you understand it so well, and it's like, okay, it can fix this issue, it does this, whatever it might be. And this is even recently, right? Even recently in my career, I recommended a technology, that is very well known. Everyone expects you when you talk about doing this project, everyone expects you to go to this technology, right? So of course I involve them in our discussions and everything else like that. And I was thrown off guard when they weren't really a fit, just because of different variables in the environment and whatnot. And, I could have taken the stance of, holding my ground, right? And trying to force it in and trying to make this thing work. When, in all actuality, it's not going to work for the environment, no matter how hard I try. And, if I try and do that, it's actually going to lower my own reputation within the organization. People aren't going to look at my recommendations the same way. They're going to be like, all right, well, there's an asterisk there. Like we have to really kind of check on this thing. It's interesting. I've also experienced that from when my direct manager couldn't let go of a technology that he loved. He brought it in, he sold it internally, and everything else like that. And it's like, hey man, this thing does not work. I'm literally spending 60 hours a week just making sure that it's up. Like, can we go with the market leader finally?
I think that cuts both ways, but when you can't let go, it becomes a personal thing. I think once it becomes a personal thing to you and you're not making mindful decisions based on context, and managers sometimes, especially if it's a 7-figure kind of price tag, like their career is basically stuck. So there's some, I'd say unhealthy motivations sometimes at a leadership level. But certainly at an engineer level, clinging on to something and making it a personal issue that you're moving off of it, or your philosophy because it's so personal to you, is definitely a career limiter that folks should just be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wanted to ask you, recently, right? I've been talking to a lot of different people, and the concept of saying yes and figuring out how to do it later, comes up quite a bit. Do you think that still holds true at the CISO level?
Yeah. And it's not bad. Saying yes isn't bad as long as it's followed with, but we'll have to see at what expense, right? I think, especially in a CISO role, we're balancing depending on the type of company, right? When you take a look at EDB, Postgres company, we're delivering it via cloud. We have technology you can install on-prem. A CISO's role is both protecting the environment, reducing the risk of a potential future incident, but it's also enabling sales. You can't have a sales pipeline if you don't have a SOC 2, or you can, but it's very hard to close deals. You look at PCI, can't sell into cardholder environments that have cardholder data. HIPAA, can't sell into healthcare. So in information security, those, especially in a tech company, you start to have other pressures that when you're a growing business, that's where the risk calculus comes in. And there's always going to be trade-offs. We can do this, but by this date, you need it by this date. All right. Yes, but here is the impact. And I think that's fine. I think people want to at least acknowledge that you're hearing them, that yes, there's value in what you're saying. You don't say yes to everything, but if there's merit there, agree to the point, like this is a great idea, but where is it going to fall? And one of the things I've learned in even prepping for my role and kind of growing into it, setting expectations, especially with peers and leadership, is very difficult. But if you don't do that, you get into a situation where a yes, but doesn't really mean much, right? Like I think you really have to set expectations of the work that you have ahead of us. So when conflicts come, where changing priorities come, they know, all right, there's going to be a trade-off we have to discuss. I know I'm already asking these 3 other things. I'm kind of smiling because I work pretty closely with our CIO, and it's a very similar conversation. He has dozens of commitments across his teams, right, for the business areas, and I'm just another participant. And he's very skilled at saying yes, but. And I think that's a valuable lesson. There's no shame in saying yes. There's no shame in saying no. But when you say yes, it generally should come with some conditions. And I think everyone appreciates that thoughtful response, especially when they're coming to you with a business problem that needs to be addressed. So,
right. So, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's talk about what EDB does, what you guys specialize in. And yeah, we'll start with that.
Yeah. Born and one of the primary around the PostgreSQL open source project, but have grown into an enterprise focused product that solves quite a few challenges that the open source project doesn't have. So we follow a similar lineage. We submit significant amount of code to Postgres over the 18 years that we've existed. Recently in the last 3-4 years, we've taken the technology and the know-how and developed a cloud platform that delivers true Postgres as a service versus Postgres compatible databases that you'll find in Azure, AWS, and GCP. And then we're building in really high value capabilities when it comes to encryption, active clusters, distributed, in different geos, and are starting down the path of including AI technology and really making this intelligent systems economy of the future a possibility using our product. And there's going to be more to share this year, but when we think about the value that we provide, which is why companies exist, right? We're allowing really heavy transactional platforms, some of the largest names, household names that you can think of that operate and leverage EDB's Postgres offering, advanced server offering. And the sheer volume and scale of the processing on open source can be challenging for some companies. And we provide that net of support, bug fixes, even performance optimization where you can get the most out of the platform. And do so in supporting our customers' journey of kind of making Postgres the de facto database, which, depending on your sources, number one most admired database, Postgres, for 2023. So it's an exciting period of time. I wish I could share a little bit more of the roadmap, but that'll come in near time. We have recently landed on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for the first time for our cloud managed database offering. And, I'll say very quickly we'll be climbing up that ladder into the leaders quadrant over time. So I have faith in that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's so much to Postgres in and of itself. And then when you factor in, trying to manage it, right? Like if you have an internal or, an external facing application that's running off of a Postgres database, right? And you have to manage it for, different customers and whatnot. I mean, that is a feat in and of itself. And then when you start thinking about the fact that it's open source, and it's, you're using this so widely and it's so widely used, it's a really impressive piece of technology, I feel, personally. I've always had, I've always been a little partial to Postgres ever since I experienced it, because it's just so versatile, and there's so many things that you can do with it. And it's a lot easier to maintain in terms of, that individual solution. It gets complex when it's, a lot more servers and whatnot, but
yeah, the scaling aspect, it works fine. Right? I have a server, you might have, the web app and the actual database on one server, and that could be fine for most environments. I think when you start scaling and running into performance, transactional performance issues or, application experience issues where you have folks on each coast and they need to have the ability to write to the database, that's really unlocked with what we're able to provide to customers. But to your point on its extensibility, you'll see a trend, and anyone that's familiar with Postgres knows this. They can go see the extension model. Postgres was built and is extensible, and every time there's a new fad database that seems to creep up, it gets the attention, dollars are pumped into supporting a vision. And Postgres just creates an extension. And for the majority of use cases for customers, that's going to solve it. So when you look at transactional kind of SQL-based workloads, yeah, that's out of the box. You take a look at graph database. There's a graph extension. You take a look at vector databases with AI. Well, there's PG Vector that satisfies that. And there's a handful of other extensions that we'll be bringing to the market that start to enable customers in particular, business organizations, to get the benefit out of the mixed mode database. The reasons why columnar database technologies exist is for analytical purposes. The reason why there's graph is to understand relationships between entities. You can do all this on Postgres. And rather than having a portfolio of 10 different database vendors, you have one. You have one you need to support. You have a trusted vendor that you can go to. And you have a performance profile that is scalable, that you don't need to worry about how a vendor implements, Neo4j as an example. Great product. But when you look at the majority of use cases that I've come across, the performance profile isn't anything you need that is overly, that requires or demands that high performance. So you start to see, especially the vector databases being huge, Pinecone, Weavy8, things like that. There are definitely value add features there. But for those that just need a vector database, need the ability to tag metadata and to be able to query that at scale, Postgres still enables you. So it's a really interesting technology, but yeah, it's something that we see every 4 or 5 years when there's some new database trend. Eventually, an extension will make its way into Postgres, and everyone will be, all right, we'll just use Postgres at this point. It's rinse and repeat. It's kind of it's entertaining to like see the trend, but when you look at the strain bringing in 4 or 5 different database technologies on an IT organization, you get to train everyone on Postgres. You have the ability to not have to have a specialist skill set in one technology or another. You can have a set of Postgres generalists really handling the various needs that the business is going to toss at you. And I don't think people recognize the value in that, especially with attrition and retention within engineering roles. You may bring in someone that's kind of the best. I'm not going to pick on Neo4j because I actually like them, but Neo4j, architect or DBA, they move on. Who's going to support this thing? Well, then you have 3-6 months where you don't have coverage for an expert, where you can really minimize the risk to bringing in technology into the enterprise. So, there's a lot of indirect value that I think organizations, many understand, but many should kind of start to think about.
So does EDB act as like a management plane for your Postgres databases that can be, across a geolocation or across, several regions, and it will, I guess, replicate and submit the data that you submit to it across your databases? Is that what it's doing?
Yeah. So Big Animal has 2 kind of key technology, I don't want to say components, but the architecture has a control plane and a data plane. Now that control plane, as it sounds, is managing, users, accounts, access permissions, kind of largely leverages the Postgres native structure for access management. But orchestrates the creation of projects, creates projects and orchestrates the creation of clusters. Those clusters could be AWS, GCP, Azure, wherever you have a cloud account. And we actually have 2 models. We have the ability to host database for the customer. So I'm a customer or I'm an indie developer and I just want to spin up a Postgres cluster. I get my trial account, you get $300 of credits. You're able to spin up accounts, and we host and can host the database instances in our environment. We also have a model called Bring Your Own Account, where you provide us an account. The infrastructure is deployed and orchestrated and managed in your cloud account. and you're getting the billing through your cloud service provider of choice. So wherever you want to run your workload, go at it. And you have the ability of setting up networking rules to ensure security and the like. We're moving towards some interesting models on how we might manage Postgres in general, but those are roadmap items that I don't think I can share. But in general, you can think of that control plane being kind of that one pane of glass for DBAs to be able to kind of manage their state and performance and secure their data at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I feel like we could talk about this for a couple hours, something like that.
Yeah, it's fun area for sure. I think keeping an eye out for EDB through 2024. A lot of exciting changes coming, and really wanting to support the development of intelligent systems that are going to change the economy. I'm not just drinking Kool-Aid, but I'm actually seeing industries being changed, and I'm 100% certain the technologies that we're going to bring to the market this year are going to really start to enable a lot of organizations that have made that investment in Postgres, that are poking at the edges of these vector databases, maybe playing with PG Vector and wondering, how do I get to scale? How do I do this the right way? There's some really interesting things that are going to be coming out this year, and I would suggest everyone just keeping an eye out. But short of that, trials are free. Go ahead, hit Big Animal. You'll be able to kind of sign up, get a trial, $300 of credits, decide what works for you, and give it a little bit of a try.
Awesome. Well, Dan, when you're able to finally talk about those new things, I'd love to have you back on and we can, dive into this a bit more. But, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you if they wanted to reach out and connect, and, where they can find EDB.
Yeah. So I'll start with EDB, enterprisedb.com. For me, I'm on LinkedIn. So Dan Garcia, I think the handle is Dan J. Garcia for those that just want a shortcut. But EDB and Dan Garcia will bring me up. Happy to connect. Just say, hey, listen to you on the show, and happy to make the connection. And we do share developments both on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow EDB as well on social media.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan, and I hope everyone listening enjoyed this episode. Thanks, everyone.